Welcome, I'm the Deadwood Jedi. This is another Raid Shadow Legends video, and today we are on the test server again, trying some different comps that, you know, maybe I haven't built in a while or that I've gotten some questions on fairly recently. Now, Demytha is one of those champions that is very popular because obviously she's a great unkillable champion, right? And so I do a lot of these unkillable teams, a lot of them dealing with Demytha, but part of the reason why is there's so many variations on it, and there's so many different ways you can build unkillable teams with her. She's really unique like that. One of the more interesting ones, I think, and I think one of the easiest ones, is a double Demytha team. It's really great because two Demythas and you have an unkillable team. It's just like using a double man-eater team or something like that, where basically you can bring in 3 DPS champions and you bring in 2 Demythas and you're good to go. Now, I will say one of the DPS champions needs to be a cleanser or a block debuff champion. Now, you can really pick and choose which one of those things you want it to be, but it does need to be one of those things, and it can get a little bit tricky. The cleansing part of it is I think a lot smoother, especially if you have a Doom Priest. If you don't have a Doom Priest or a Tuhana Rock, it can be a little bit trickier, but a block debuff is an excellent way to go as well. So one of the things that I've noticed that people have had issues with is when you come against Spirit, and I put on some notes on the website for this, but basically you want to be above 165 speed with your DPS champions in order to make that work. So I built a team that should work on Spirit Affinity. We're not going to take down Nightmare enough to actually show you Spirit Affinity, unfortunately, being in the test server and all, but I will be able to give you guys at least an example of how this works and show you some really cool things that you can do with this comp, including using champions like Rotos or Whisper, because extra turns won't break this comp. Pretty cool, I think. So let's go ahead and get into this. Before we do, though, I do want to remind you, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell, and if you like today's music, check out my Soundstripe link down below in the pinned comment description of this video, like all my videos, because I use this music on all my stuff. So if you want copyright-free music, I highly encourage you to check them out. But all that said, let's look at the build, how I've set it up, and then we'll go ahead and show you the run. Okay, this is a team that I'm going to be bringing in here. We have Doom Priest to be our cleanser, Turvold, and Rotos Lost Groom as our other DPS. Turvold should give us weaken, Rotos should give us decreased defense, and then of course we have our 2 Demythas. Now, with Doom Priest here, she's an amazing cleanser. We do want her going first. You might notice though she has 154 speed. This is definitely lower than it should be. The reason why it works, we have her in the lead, so we're going to be using her speed aura, and being the only, Force Affinity champion here, it's just going to affect her speed. So that extra 15% speed boost she gives is going to bring that 154 all the way up to 169 speed, which is the max speed we can have for our DPS champions for it to work on both Ultra Nightmare and Nightmare. Now, our 2 DPS champions are both over 165 speed, which is what we need for this to work on Spirit Affinity for Ultra Nightmare or Nightmare. And so we have our Turvold here at 165 speed. We'd note if we turned off his A2, I'm just going to have him taking all the buffs from the Doom Priest and the Demythas, having those extended, and that'll give Turvold a full debuff bar, which is pretty awesome. So he's going to really be able to maximize this A3 skill that does more damage based off the number of buffs on his kit. It's pretty fun to watch. Next, we also have Rotos. Now, Rotos obviously gets those extra turns off of his A1 skill, and normally that's an issue, but I didn't care. I put him in Relentless gear. I have Doom Priest in Relentless gear too, and it doesn't matter. The reason why is none of these champions are going to have skills that need to be happening at specific times. So Doom Priest cleanses every single turn. If we were to use somebody like a Battle Khazar, we definitely could not use Relentless gear. Or if we wanted to use a block debuff champion like, say, an Under Priest Brogni, again, we absolutely cannot use Reflex gear. But because that's not the case, we can go ahead and put Reflex on Doom Priest. She's unique like that. Now, Rotos being one of our DPS champions, again, we can use Relentless on him. We could put Relentless on Turvold too. And the reason why is because Demytha having a 1-turn block damage skill, and because we have 2 of them, we're going to be placing that at the end of every single turn. That means our champions don't have to survive multiple turns keeping those buffs up. They can lose them every turn. And because of that, and because they go before Demytha, they can take as many extra turns as they want to, and it won't hurt the build at all, which is pretty cool, I think. And of course, you know, we have the Demythas here. Now, one thing it is important with Demytha, especially when we're going in Spirit Affinity, we really need them to be able to use that A2 first to cleanse that, to at least reduce the duration of those speed debuffs, because they go at the top of the turn for Ultra Nightmare. Now, Nightmare's a little different. Nightmare, the Doom Priest is going to go first, so we don't have to worry about the timing so much. But we do for Ultra Nightmare, because she's going to be going at the top of the turn, and extending those buffs also reduces the duration of the cooldowns of the debuffs. And so that means that while she has a 2-turn speed debuff on her, she's taking 1 turn and reducing it by another turn, which means at the end of her turn, she won't have any speed debuff. It's basically like a cleanse for herself. For the rest of the team, that's not the case, which is why we have Doom Priest in there. But for her, that'll work. But in order to really make that happen, we need her to use that skill at the top of her turn. That'll ensure that she does get a second turn. If she gets slowed down too much, that won't happen, and that'll be a major issue for us. So we do want to make sure that we have those skills timed out. Now, one of the reasons why you can use a block debuff champion in one of these DPS slots is because Demytha does extend the buff at the end of her turn. In order to do that, you want that Brogni, you know, ideally, maybe a Blind Seer, someone with a 2-turn block debuff skill on a 3-turn cooldown. You can use, and I think is a really, really good choice for this, you can use Tatura Rhymehide is a really good option. Just make sure to prioritize that skill. But because if you have them going last in the turn order for the DPS champions, what'll happen is block the debuff for the Spirit Affinity right before that AoE, and then at the top of that turn, the Demytha is going to extend that buff, so it will cover us for the stun as well. So it can become a really, really good way to utilize that skill. And so that's what we're going to be doing here, right? Obviously, we're not using Tatura, we're not using any block debuff, we're using Doom Priest to cleanse, and this is going to be a very, very nice run. So let's go ahead and get into it. I do have it set up almost on auto, so we're going to go ahead and do this run, and then afterwards, after we get through it, I'll show you the champions and how I built them. Okay, so as we get into it, all I need to do is basically, there's one skill I have to manual. So I'm going to auto for most of this. So I'm going to auto this first turn. We get the buff, the block damage. We get the extension, boom. I'm going to auto the start of this second turn from Doom Priest for Rotos, Turvold. And then I need to stop that auto because this first Demytha, the one that placed the block damage, or I believe is, I have to go A1. That's all I have to do. A1 right there. Boom, can click auto again, and now we're good to go. And the reason why is we need to use the extension skill, the A2 ability, before we use the A3 skill. And by setting it up this way, we can basically run it on full auto from this point on. Now, as far as using a champion like Rotos or a champion like Whisper, for example, both of which can work in this comp, even though they get those extra turns, they're probably not the best choices. And one of the reasons why I don't really love Turvold in this comp, or I'm sorry, the reason why I don't love Rotos in this comp is he doesn't have a very high percentage chance of landing that decreased defense on his A1. Decreased defense is a very valuable skill. We need that to happen pretty much every turn. And you can see the extra turns. They're not hurting this run at all. We're still blocking that damage. It's totally fine. He won't be extending all the buffs and filling up his debuff, or his the buffs on his kit as much, right? We lose the increased attack from Doom Priest, things that are valuable, but the extra turns are obviously more valuable. But he doesn't keep that decreased defense up for the full fight, and that's problematic. Turvold, however, because he is going on a regular pace, will keep the weaken up pretty much for the full fight, right? I mean, every other turn he'll reapply it essentially. And so that's gonna work really well for him, not as great for Rotos, unfortunately. If I were actually going to build this team and try and optimize it, I would probably bring in Martyr instead of Rotos, get some free counterattacks, get some decreased defense more regularly, the weaken more regularly, and we'll have a much better result overall. But in spite of that, independent of that, I think this is actually a pretty fun way to build a team. You know, you don't get to see Rotos in Clan Boss very often. And it's unique about Demytha because she's reapplying that block damage every single turn. And that allows us to be able to do something like this, to put him in Relentless gear and have him work in this team. You know, we can use Whisper as well. We're gonna run into the same issues that we have with Rotos, and she's not as good of a damage dealer, so not always worth it. But, you know, if you're struggling and you're like, I need a weakened champion, she's definitely a good option and somebody I would consider using. Now, the reason why this particular build works with 2 Demythas, even though you can see Turvold's got 10 buffs on, it's like, how do we keep that block damage buff up? Well, it's because what Demytha is going to place the block damage first and the increase healing second. So all he needs is every time that block damage falls off, he's still got 9 slots, and that's going to leave 1 open for Demytha to add that block damage at the end every single time. And that's why the Demythas as well, they're never going to overfill their buff bars. You can see Doom Priest, same thing. Rotos, same thing. They will always have room for that block damage buff. That's what keeps this team completely unkillable for 50 turns. It's pretty remarkable. So anyway, let's jump ahead towards the end of this run so we can kind of see how it turns out. And you can watch this as it gets farther along. Pay attention to some of Turvold's hits. If we have decreased defense and weaken up, he does crazy damage, which is really fun to see, especially when he uses that A3 skill. It's very nice to watch. But anyway, I'll get off the screen. You guys enjoy the music, and we'll come back after. Okay, very solid 2 key damage here with a bunch of Relentless procs. I think I saw Doom Priest go 4 turns in a row at some point here. But 12 million from Rotos, 17 from Turvold, 5 from Doom Priest. You know, the Demythas don't do a whole lot. They don't have a lot of attacks, so not too shabby. Definitely a solid team. You know, I think if I was going to fully optimize this team, though, I would be bringing in Martyr. I would bringing in Brogni, and I think that would give me the best results. Increased defense, increased attack. You get the reflex from Brogni's shield, so you're getting at least Giant Slayer's procs off of that. You're getting, you know, massive damage from Turvold still, and then you have Martyr giving us counterattacks, so more attacks, keeping up the decreased defense and decreased attack. Probably put both the Demythas in Toxic Gear. I mean, if you really wanted to optimize it, there's some things you can do to make it happen. But I'm very happy with this result. I think this is a very good team for a lot of people out there. You're probably not going to do much more than 2 key damage, no matter how much you try to optimize it. I never say never. 1 key is certainly possible, but this is probably about what you should expect. Now, this is the test server, so I can build them up, and I decided why not try it. That's why we brought Rotos in, because, like, you know, why not? Let's see it. So let's check out what I did for them. Turvold, you can see 5,500, 5,600 attack, that 165 speed, 100% crit rate, 291 crit damage, and 237 accuracy to land those debuffs. Mastery-wise, we went down the offensive tree and we went down the defensive tree here. Now, Rotos, as you can see, we put him in Relentless gear. As far as his stats go, 100% crit rate, 261 crit damage, 277 actually, a little bit higher than I needed, and 5,200 attack. His masteries, we went down the offensive tree and the defensive tree as well. It's nice going down the defensive tree, even with the Mythic comps, if you have a cleanser, because then you can get this deterrence, which gives you some free counterattacks when somebody takes that stun. Otherwise, generally, it doesn't really matter. You can go down the support tree. Is probably a better choice because with the Demytha blocking damage, you're not getting any of those free counterattacks from the Retribution Mastery. So it generally becomes more helpful to take Master Hexer to extend the duration of your debuffs, as well as Sniper to land them more often. And then we had Doom Priest here, also in Relentless gear. Always a nice thing for your healers. At 154 speed, like I said, has a 15% speed aura for red affinity champions. So it worked just for Doom Priest in this case, and that was a nice little thing we could do to, you know, make the speeds a lot easier for us. 4,000 attacks, pretty good. 254 crit damage. I think it's a pretty good Doom Priest. Mastery-wise, we went down the offensive tree and the defensive tree as well. And then we get to the 2 Demythas. Now, They're not like perfectly built at all, but we have 100% crit rate on both of them. 265 speed is kind of what we were looking for. There's a lot of range actually with the speeds here. 265 works just fine. 260 is kind of the minimum range that we want to get to on that. So it worked out really nicely. The other Demytha, of course, we have at 261 speed. 100% crit rate again. Now, as far as the masteries go, I went down 2 different routes. It doesn't really matter that much, right? We just want to make sure we're going down a War Master like I did in this one and going down the defensive tree otherwise. For my other Demytha, you can see we started going down the support tree and I just didn't bother finishing it because it didn't matter. Demytha only gets 1 attack per turn, so we're not really getting a lot out of her. Obviously, if we brought in counterattack, building up her damage would be a lot more helpful, but it doesn't really matter that much. The big thing is, we just want to make sure they don't get stunned. That part is going to be important. And by putting them last in the turn order, that really avoids that completely, so it won't be an issue for us. But that's going to be the biggest thing. Don't let them get stunned, and you'll be in good shape. So that's the double Demytha comp. Like I said, you can bring Relentless in if you want to for your DPS champions. You can use people like Rotos, like Whisper that take extra turns. You don't want to use champions that give you turn meter boosts, right? Ninja's not going to be good for this type of a comp. You're not going to want to use Marksman. They can really mess it up. Juliana's a no-go. But otherwise, you have a lot of freedom. I do think that having a block damage or block debuff champion is going to be better. Tatura Rhymehide is a fantastic choice. I think Brogni's the best choice available for you. Even a Blind Seer can be really good. You want it to be 2 turns on a 3-turn cooldown and prioritize that skill. You got to time it right. And other than that, you know, a Cleanser is a really good option. Doom Priest is wonderful for these types of teams and definitely somebody I'd recommend. You can even use a champion like, say, like a Bad Alcazar, I think would be phenomenal for this type of stuff. The hard part, though, is they will get, you know, you have to make sure that you can either cleanse the spirit debuff or the stun. You're not going to be able to do both with someone like Bad Alcazar. Thankfully, Demytha at the top of that turn uses that A2 skill and will reduce the cooldown. So, you know, if they're going first on Ultra Nightmare, you can totally cleanse the stun using Demytha only, and then you really do just have to worry about the affinity debuff. So a champion like Bad Alcazar can be very usable even against Spirit Affinity. The harder part is on Nightmare, where your fastest champion, your fastest DPS champion, excuse me, will generally go before your Demythas. So you got to be a little bit more careful there, because if that fastest champion is Bad Alcazar, your cleanser, like it should be, but Bad Alcazar is going to be bad affinity, going to take that stun likely, unless you bring in somebody else of the same affinity and, you know, put them higher up in the turn order. Somebody like a Geomancer, for example. So you do need to be a little bit careful as far as the stun targeting goes, because, you know, obviously they have to go after Demytha to have that cleansed, right? So that's going to be a thing. So just kind of keep that in mind if you're going to be trying to use this on Spirit Affinity, especially for Nightmare. For Ultra Nightmare, it shouldn't make much of a difference at all, but it's a very fun comp. I think it's very good for a lot of people and not that difficult to build. So it could be a wonderful option for a lot of you out there, and it easily has 2 key potential. For a lot of people, especially if you don't have great gear, 3 key is probably your expectation. You just don't get any damage out of Demytha, and, you know, only getting damage out of 3-year champions can really lower the, you know, the expectations. But champions like Geomancer, Underpriest Brogni, they do so much for you anyway. Sometimes all you need is those 3 champions and you're fine. You're good to go, right? You're going to get that 2 key without any issue. And honestly, I think if I were optimizing this team, I would not be surprised getting about 50 or 60 million out of it just by bringing in somebody like Martyr for this squad, or even a Brogni, to be honest with you. So there's lots of ways to go about building this team, lots of flexibility to it. Hopefully you guys found this helpful and will help you with your builds going forward. So as always, check your speeds in the calculator before you run your team. Save yourself some silver. That's what it's there for. And yeah, don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification bell, check out that Soundstripe link if you like today's music. And until next we meet, I'm the Deadwood Jedi.